alcohol-free. What do you think when you think of the word alcohol-free? It's kind of like those things that don't really make sense. It's like music that's sound-free, or like a car that doesn't drive. And when you see somebody that has an alcohol-free beer, I used to, at least for me, think for myself, there's a question I really want to ask, but you don't want to spoil the mood. And it's, what's the point of beer if it doesn't have alcohol? And today I'm going to talk about the story of how I started this company that is currently we're doing about 2 beers every minute, which has been really, really fortunate. And it's how we got to this point. So I remember when I first had a beer, so what was that moment like? And as a kid, I grew up in a fairly boring, sort of normal family, and having a glass of wine or having a beer at dinner was sort of as normal as having a coffee in the morning. And so, as a kid, you would want to have whatever the adults had. And alcohol was definitely one of those you couldn't have. And I would just beg and see what this mystery juice was. You know, these adults would come back and would just be having this thing and that they'd just be really enjoying it. And one day, I think they relented. They relented and they went, you know what, you could try, but only under one condition. You can only dip with your pinky finger. And so I thought, ran over, dipped as much as I could, double dipped, triple dipped, just to see what it was like. And the moment I put it in, I instantly spat it out. I thought, why on earth would they drink something like that? It was not tasty. It was sort of like, it was not like grape juice. There were so many things that tasted better. And that thought sort of just set aside, and I never understood it until I started working. And then fast forward a bit from that, I absolutely love beer. Loved it so much that I started studying it professionally since I was 18. And it was something that I thought, it was sort of like adult confectionery. You know, it's like sweets for adults, and it's great. The flavors are good, and the social experience you get is excellent. And I thought, you know what? The best thing I could do is to actually work in it. Imagine you could have a beer while you were at work. Nice. Right, so I would almost put aside my degree and just focus on studying alcohol as much as I could. But everything all changed one day. And it turns out, casually having about 5 to 8 pints a night is probably not a good idea. And once I found that out, the doctors were telling me that I'm probably not meant to have this much. And I had liver problems that I didn't expect, and that was about 22 at the time. And so that really changed everything. The idea that something I loved so much and I really wanted to have, that all just flipped overnight. All the work that I did just to learn about alcohol, all of that gone. So what am I going to do? What am I going to do now? Of course, when I then go and meet my friends and have a chat with them and go to our usual pub and have a drink, I'd then be, instead of ordering a beer, I'd be having a Coke in my hand. And you get this weird feeling that when you're right next to them, and then they would be talking about their day, they'd be talking about what was bothering them, and you just sort of feel that they're kind of uncomfortable about you being there. You're stone cold sober, right? They're just revealing what they're thinking and talking about all of that. And of course, they don't want to be rude. They don't want to say anything. But slowly and gradually, you could feel that the connection just isn't there anymore. So I was like, what am I going to do? So then I went and got alcohol-free beers. I was like, that could be quite good. At least I can go undercover and sort of pretend I'm having a beer. Had some of those, and I didn't realize, it was a pain. It was a pain. It would have this distinctively metallic taste. I don't know what it was. And on top of that, it had a sweetness that was just quite unusual. It's not very pleasant. It's like a sort of cheap artificial sweetener kind of taste. And that, I sort of gritted my teeth and stomached as much alcohol-free beer as I could, and when people are having a couple of pints, I'd be having a few of those. And one day I genuinely just had enough. It was not good. I think some of you guys would have tried some of the earlier alcohol-free renditions out there, and they're not great. And so I did philosophy at Durham University, and while it has nothing to do with this, and probably, in all honesty, not a very useful degree for careers, it did teach me a very important lesson about asking boring questions starting with why. And the question I had was, why did we drink in the first place? Sure, flavor was an important part, definitely punctuates the entire experience, but ultimately it was the way it made us feel. And if we go back in time, human history has always had alcohol, almost since the beginning. It provided us a reliable, sanitary way of hydration. It also gave us a way to relax and unwind after a long day. And more importantly, it brought people together. But it also had problems that we didn't expect. Hydration turned into excessive inebriation, and of course the relaxing and unwinding experience turned into hangovers as well. And oftentimes, the people that alcohol brought together was often driven apart by that as well, as alcohol is one of the leading causes of preventable death around the world. And so, what could we do about this? And I thought, I really wanted something that was good, that just really tasted like the real thing, and that you could also get that missing feeling. Don't know what it is, can't really articulate it, but that sort of missing feeling that you get. So at the time, didn't really have any, lost my friends, and alone and just desperate and just really trying to make it work. And so the journey began to really try and find a way to have an alternative where you can relax and unwind while enjoying the proper experience of a good beer. But what do I know? I was just a uni student that really liked beer. I could try and homebrew and do all sorts of stuff, but I needed help to find that. And I would go to beer experts all around and try and see, if they could lend me a hand to see how can we create this ultimate sort of beer replacement. And most of them just said straight up no. Some of them were pretty polite. Some of them were less so. And one said that I still really very much remember was that what you're trying to do is impossible. And I knew I needed somebody that was more forward-thinking than that, and that could think outside the box, and it was away from the beer space. And that was when I began working with Dr. Paul Jazo at Durham University. It's been a really interesting experience, and it's to see what we can do in this space and how we can understand this relationship with alcohol better. And it was hard. I think there's a reason why most people haven't done it. And we couldn't really find much until I went back home to Hong Kong. So I went back for a regular health checkup, just to check in on my family as well, see how they're doing. And so I realized something quite strange, was that all the folks, when they're stressed and when they'd like a drink, not that they'd like a drink, but when they're stressed and when they're looking for a sort of relaxation route, they don't typically go to alcohol, or they don't go to, say, medicine or anything like that. They'd have these really odd-looking dark concoctions that look a bit like tea from like sort of Asian medicine. And they were kind of weird, but they would swear by it. And for some reason, it worked. So bringing some of that over and thinking maybe there's some legs there, and that was when Dr. Jazo and we started working on a lot of this, and to see how this could all work. And we found something that is quite interesting, and that it turns out there are a lot of plants in the world that do more for you than just nourish us. So say, for example, the most common one is caffeine from coffee beans. They give us energy, they provide us something extra on top of just nutrition. And there are 40,000 active plants out there that do this sort of thing, and there's a lot of research that's been done, but nobody really looks into that. And we thought, what if you could have something that also works as that relaxation piece? And that was when we found a really interesting amino acid called L-theanine. It sounds like mumbo jumbo, but what it is green tea. Think of green tea. There's a difference between green tea and coffee, even though the caffeine content's fairly similar, that it feels a bit more relaxed, and you don't really know why. And we thought, what if you could take away that element, which is the element that's bringing it down, and that's why when you have green tea, it's a little bit more relaxing that comes on the side. What if we can take that element out and see what we can do? And it turns out it also works with the brain in a very particular way. It works with our GABA receptors in the brain, and it's a very similar receptor, but it's in fact the exact same receptor that alcohol works with. And so from there, we tried to put it all together into a blend that I would just experiment on myself, and as well as experimenting with other different means, and I would put it in just general beverages when I'm going out. So I'm like, put some in, mix it in, see what it's like. But there's a problem. You might think, if this was such a good idea, why haven't some of the bigger beer companies have done it, or why haven't other people have done it before? And that's because when I started brewing it, that was when I realized why. They tasted so bad. It was just so herby, so dense, and you don't want a planty beer. Nobody likes the one of that. So we thought, what can we do? So no matter how much we try and brew, I would be brewing in my university dorm room at first, and then we'd try all sorts of different recipes. But ultimately, it didn't really work until a friend asked me a question. He was like, I randomly met up with him, and then he's asked me, oh, what are you up to? And I told him about making this beer that's quite cool. And he said, how do you make these beers? And I would explain to him how normal alcohol-free beers are made. They'd typically be, you would get a fully alcoholic beer and take away the alcohol, or you dilute it down to the percentage that you want, or you use more high-tech things like reverse osmosis to really remove it. But ultimately, it all involves removal. And when I just explained it to him, he just went blank. And he said to me, I thought you brew these things. And I thought, that's quite interesting. How did I never think of that? Why would you dilute something that was already alcoholic? But instead, you could just brew it from scratch, from the ground up, and just control the alcohol percentage. And from that point, you can actually implement some of these really bitter ingredients that we talked about earlier into the start of the process, and that the flavors wouldn't affect it anymore. And so it was from that point on that IMPOSSIBREW was born. So we're here to really create that third way between drinking and not drinking. And since then, it's been really quite good. We've since been on Dragon's Den, when we also now mainly sell online, and it's been good, but that hasn't been, it seems like everything's going well, we're changing the way people drink and so on. That hasn't been the hardest part. The hardest part actually came a couple months ago. It was during another routine check that I went back to my doctor, and he said he had really good news. And I was like, what's the good news? It's been 3 years since that time, 3 to 4 years since that time, and he said the good news was your blood work came back normal. Well, in fact, more than normal. I was in the best physical shape I ever was before. And he said, well, you can drink now. Well, that's kind of awkward. So what was all this for? Maybe I could have just stopped drinking for a couple of years, and then this would all have been good. And so it was hard because we're a team of 7, and imagine having that awkward conversation with the rest of the team. Be like, guys, I can drink now, so it's all going to be gone. But I ultimately came to the realization that by continuing what we're doing, we can really try and make that difference, because without this journey, I would have never realized that I never needed it in the first place. It was something that finally gave me the answer to the question that we started with. What's the point of beer if it doesn't have alcohol? It's not about the alcohol. It's what is it for? Beer was for the way in which it could get you to relax. It could get you to have create these uniquely cherished moments with friends. And that's what that's for. And it's not just alcohol for the sake of alcohol. And if you don't need to have the hangovers for it, all the better. And because ultimately, after all, alcohol or not, if you're enjoying your time, Does it really matter? I'm Mark Wong, and the founder of IMPOSSIBREW, and thank you very much for being here today.
Thank you, Mark. When you were working with, by the way, for the audience, Paul Shazo, who you mentioned, was actually our first Bright Ideas speaker. He spoke at the very first Bright Ideas and has gone on to have our most popular video so far, which evidently has led to about £500,000 of funding for him from he hasn't told you about this.
I didn't know about this. Oh, that's awesome.
News, yeah. In terms of in terms of happening upon, so is L-theanine in your drink?
Yes, that's right.
It is, okay, right. And so I think you told me about something like 4,000 compounds, organic things out there that, first, is that number right?
It's about 40,000 active plants. So it's plants that do something for you and your body, but it could be all sorts of things.
Right, okay. So did you say 40,000?
40.
Okay, yeah. 40,000, 40,000, okay. And so I guess, I mean, ultimately, I assume you didn't try 40,000 different...
Oh, no.
Right, okay. So I suppose, what were you looking for, in the search for these bioactive compounds that then eventually led you to L-theanine?
Good question. I think, especially with a beverage or food and drink in general, it has to first of all be something that, well, it has to first work.
Sure.
Making sure that it needs to mimic and replicate the same ways that alcohol works, or at least somewhat similar ways that it works. And secondly, it has to be commonly available. It has to be something that's safe and that people have used for a long time. Right. And it's just a combination of them that's novel. Because if you're getting something completely new in, there's no chance it could get anywhere. So it'll have to be something that already exists, has a lot of research on, and that also ticks the box of working with the brain the same way. So it was difficult, but the candidates narrowed down.
Right, okay, cool. And I mean, I don't know if you can talk about, so you've obviously mentioned L-theanine, which you're saying that's the same active compound that's in green tea.
Yes, that's right.
Okay, cool. Except, so I've tried your drink. You gave some samples last night, and you definitely do feel something, and alcohol-like, I would say, actually. Naturally, it does clear a lot faster than regular alcohol, which I think is a very good thing, sort of thing. And I mean, ultimately, you now obviously have, I mean, how many cans of IMPOSSIBREW have you sold so far, roughly? You should probably know this.
I don't actually. But we know from October, there was a really funny stat, was if we stacked up all the cans we sold in October, it just about reaches Mount Everest.
Right.
Which is very cool.
That's
and it's
very
about
cool.
2 cans every minute.
Okay, yeah. And so I guess, I mean, my point in bringing that up is that you obviously have a now increasingly large base of customers. And I mean, ultimately, are they coming? I'm sure you have a lot of people who are trying it for the first time, but I'm sure you also have a certain number of people who are coming back. And I guess, what are they reporting to you in terms of their experience?
It's less about actually the products, but it's about the benefit that they've had. And the main goal that a lot of them have found is that, well, you don't feel like you need to drink anymore. It's like perfect for the midweek thing, and it's just have a few, and you can perfectly just trick yourself that it is a beer, and that your overall consumption goes down. People say they lose weight, and it's just ultimately making it a little bit better.
Nice. Okay. Yeah. Because that was my thinking. It was the kind of thing where, if you want to have that mental break or just that wind down sort of thing, to have a product like yours where it gives you that effect, but perhaps 10% of the time with the effect of, say, alcohol sort of thing, that it did give exactly that little break. Speaking of your product, my understanding is that we have samples coming.
I think so.
Yeah. No,
fingers crossed.
Fingers crossed, but I think it'll be for the afternoon break.
Yes, that's right. I think so.
Yeah. So, yeah.
Can't wait for you guys to try. Let me know what you think.
So, Mark, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Great to see you. Cheers. Thank you.